Now, please welcome Associate Director at Cirrus, Mike O'Donnell.
Good morning, and thank you for joining the newest Iowa Technology Summit track, Industry 4.0, sponsored by Cirrus. The Center for Industrial Research and Service was created in 1963 to improve the quality of life in Iowa by helping business and their communities prosper and grow. Our individually tailored strategy, Engage, Educate, Embed, means we work with companies to fashion solutions specific to their individual needs. To learn more, visit cirrus.iastate.edu. Throughout the session, feel free to ask any questions via the Q&A section for speakers to address. Now let me introduce our speakers. Madison Lang, Director of ML and AI Services, and Bruce Jounce, VP of Infrastructure and Cloud Services at Cirrus, who will be presenting the Dream Team, Cloud and Analytics. Madison works to understand companies' business problems, set goals with them, and identifies how they can harness data to empirically drive decisions through advanced analytics and machine learning. Bruce is a highly experienced infrastructure architect, solutions engineer, and team leader with extensive expertise in designing and deploying service-oriented architecture and identity management infrastructure. Please join me in welcoming Madison and Bruce.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everybody.
So we're going to talk today about how you can align your cloud and analytics practices so that you're making the best value for your business. Here's a brief agenda. We're going to talk about a little bit more information about cloud and analytics, maturity levels within both areas, what our approach is working with our customers, what trends we see in the data and cloud space, what the value of alignment is, and how you can align your initiatives to make sure you're on the right track. And then at the end, we'll have an open Q&A. So first, let's talk about cloud and what the real value is that we see, or I've seen in my time that I've been working with cloud, and really starts with agility and providing tools that are at your fingertips at a very short time frame. So you can leverage capabilities that you may not be able to do in a traditional on-premise or environment, and be able to use those for a short period of time for like a proof of concept or a longer duration, depending on what the business need is. The second item is reliability. Most cloud providers have designed their infrastructure in a way that it provides high availability, reliability for your business operations to be available all the time. So the design typically is made up of regions that people deploy their services to. Within those regions, there's redundancies such as multiple zones, and in which each of those zones have multiple data centers. So there's a lot of redundancies, but how you deploy your services and configure things really depends on how much of that redundancy you're really leveraging. And the final piece is being able to scale your environment properly. In today's cloud world, there's a lot of automation built into that scaling. So you can scale up and scale down as your workload demands change or your business demands change, so that you can make sure you're meeting those or exceeding those demands and not falling short for your customers and having performance issues.
Okay, so what about on the analytics side? What are the benefits we see from being able to do analytics well? So every organization we know today has a lot of data, and that amount of data that companies are going to have into the future is only going to continue to grow. So analytics is all about turning all of that data into usable information. And so we do that by discovering new insights. Those insights can then inform our decisions and lead to optimal and timely, profitable actions. So this is harder done than it might be if only it was as easy to do as it is for people to want to be able to do it. So unfortunately, as you're going to see, few companies are able to do this and turn their analytics initiatives into tangible, measurable, and actionable value. And so why do we think this is so hard? Well, what we've seen and kind of what led to us putting together this presentation is that as we work and consult with a lot of different companies, we saw that a lot of organizations are trying to do both of these initiatives. They have cloud on their roadmaps, they have analytics initiatives as part of their goals for this upcoming year. And a lot of the times these initiatives are being done in a divergent path. So certain teams are trying to execute on the cloud side and others are trying to do analytics. What we really saw is that there is so much overlap when it comes to being able to be successful from both a cloud and an analytics perspective. So let's look at some of those key pieces where we see the most overlap and why it would be so important for companies to work holistically on both their cloud and their analytics initiatives. So first up is platform. So if you want to do analytics, where are you going to do it? If this isn't well defined and thought through, I can tell you where it's probably going to happen, which is on Excel on each employee's laptop. And, that's not to demonize Excel. Excel is super valuable for so many companies. And, we think long term it's going to stay in the marketplace. But it can really pay dividends long term if you are able to provide a shareable and collaborative platform for you to do analytics and reporting. Standing up this platform, though, ultimately needs to pull in some people from the IT side. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you'll get a variety of piecemealed and fragmented approaches with each business unit trying to do things a different way. This leads to frustration on the business side. It can also lead to huge frustrations on the IT side as you try to manage all of these various platforms. So that kind of translates into this access piece. Organizations today really have to start prioritizing responsible use and protection of the data that they have. And most of the time today, IT tends to bear the burden of that responsibility. So oftentimes it puts them in the position that IT needs to be the bad cop, and they get this reputation of stifling innovation and cutting off access and not granting access when people request it. But we really see that if you are able to incorporate IT into some of these analytics goals and initiatives from the very beginning, and you bring them into the business value that you're going to see from being able to accomplish what you're trying to do, and include them in the platform selection and the rollout, and say, we're trying to standardize as much as possible. In that case, we see IT being much more inclined to want to grant the access and offload some of that data ownership to the business. So next is governance. So defining what data means in various contexts and defining data owners and having locations that users can go out and reference. So if they're questioning what business rules were used in generating different metrics or reports, that's all part of data governance. And so many companies today are prioritizing governance initiatives, and rightfully so. But if you're going to be successful in doing this, this really is an enterprise-wide initiative. It really has to start with leadership buy-in from the very top, and then it's really a wide initiative, not as much of a deep initiative. So it's really a committee that needs to be pulling in people from various different departments within the organization, including IT, and driven by the business. And so once again, that alignment and overlap and communication across the organization is super important. And finally, operationalizing. So how do you operationalize the insights that you find through your analytics initiatives? This so oftentimes can be the hardest part when it comes to data projects. And one reason for that we see is pushing a model into production and deploying a model oftentimes requires a different skill set than maybe the people who produced the models or did the analytics. It's a different skill set than they might have. So if you get to the point where you already have this model ready to go into production, and then you start pulling in your data engineers and your infrastructure people at that point, oftentimes it can really stall the project. Or even worse, you might realize once you bring those people in that the requirements to get this model into production totally changes the approach you should have taken from the analytics piece at the beginning. And it could lead to a lot of rework, or even worse, you may decide that, this model is no longer viable due to the, the necessary steps that have to take to put it into production. So I guess with that, it becomes a little less surprising that only 32% of companies are able to realize tangible and measurable value from their data. And only 27% say that their data and analytics insights were highly actionable. So, how do we overcome this? It really, we've seen, comes down to that overlap piece. So how do we focus in on those pieces that require both infrastructure and cloud teams to work alongside the analytics and business teams to make sure everyone's initiatives are the most successful? So when we talk about getting started, we want to understand where you are today so we can help you build and continue to grow into the future. So we're going to start with looking at some maturity curves. So we're going to look at, what do we see as the maturity curve from an analytics perspective? What do we see as a maturity curve looking like from a cloud and infrastructure perspective? And then we can slowly start to build on where you are today so we can have more just continue to mature into the future. So when we first look at analytics, you may be familiar with these terms. So we're going to start with descriptive and diagnostic analytics. So these are lower on the maturity curve, but that by no means that this is easy to accomplish. Or if you feel like you are in these bubbles, don't be discouraged. What descriptive and diagnostic analytics means is that you're looking at your data and you're analyzing and reporting off of what's already happened in the past. So like I said, this isn't easy. In fact, most of the time when we go in and we meet with customers and we're trying to, help them do really cool things, they want and have a desire to do more advanced things, but we typically end up first addressing some shortcomings on the descriptive and diagnostic side. So there's so many benefits to be found if you're able to lay a really strong reporting foundation. But there's also a ton of value in being able to mature into predictive analytics. So this is using that same historic data that you were reporting on in your descriptive reports, but now you're able to pull in some advanced statistical modeling and advanced capabilities like machine learning. And you can then use all of that past data to predict what's going to happen into the future. This will allow you to make adjustments and make really impactful decisions while it's still advantageous to do so. And ultimately, what we were trying to get to is prescriptive analytics. So knowing now what's going to happen in the future with those predictive analytics, how can we automate some of the actions we take based on that foresight? And as you do that, you can also find ways to allow those actions to be taken with less and less human intervention. So not every decision can be automated, but if you are able to offload some of those more repetitive, mundane tasks, you'll be able to gain some efficiencies in reworking and leveraging your human time and human resources in the most advantageous way.
So taking a look at this from a cloud perspective, maturity levels can align with how the analytics maturity line is going up the curve similarly, in that the starting point is typically in your traditional data center, whether it's hosted on your own physical location or in a hosting provider. There might be a private cloud in place, but having that public or some of those analytic tools aren't quite available to your being yet. And so you're starting to think about what cloud looks like, but you're not quite there. The next step up is starting to leverage some of those cloud capabilities in a lift and shift model where you're minimizing the change to the applications and trying to minimize the risk to the business, but you're starting to leverage some of the capabilities in the cloud, such as no longer having hardware to manage or being able to still scale up and scale down the resources that are provided to those lift and shift services. As you go up the curve, you really start to look at how can you refactor and redesign your applications to really to provide full automation to your application. So you want to be able to turn on auto scale so that you can scale your resources out as demand needs it. You can scale down as your workload changes and you're maybe in a non-busy season. So there's a lot of capabilities you can add into your service with an automated functionality that your apps can leverage and take advantage of. The final piece is when you've got all of the workloads that are going to the cloud there, you're able to just get into this maintenance mode where you're looking at new technologies, new capabilities, and how you can bring those into your applications most effectively. And in that time, you're able to really just make your application as perfect as possible and really start to get the most value out of the cloud that's there and that you can take advantage within your application and your business. So looking at this from a different perspective, we're going to go up a pyramid starting with the bottom. And this is some terms that you've probably heard of within the cloud space. So infrastructure as a service is your entry point into the cloud in some aspects, in that you're going to have a little bit longer implementation time because you're still building servers, installing software, configuring networks. You still have some things that you have to set up. And then the maintenance of those services going forward typically takes more time and more resources. As you move up into a platform as a service, this really gets into where you're going to leverage capabilities, but you're not going to have visibility to the underlying compute resources necessarily. So you're able to do some configuration, and it's going to still take a little time to get things up and going, but the maintenance overall is going to be less, and it's going to be easier to keep in line going forward. And the final piece is software as a service, and this really is taking an off-the-shelf type product that's cloud-based and just using it. It's just a consumption model. So at this point, there's very little maintenance, if any, and the implementation time is typically much less. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but what we see typically is that the time is quicker to get those implemented.
So once we, review those maturity levels, how do you start progressing down the path to continue your growth in those different areas? So we at Xeris, we're IT consulting companies. So we come in and we help companies figure out how to progress up this maturity curve. And so ultimately, most of cloud and analytics initiatives will lead to a need for new technology. But what we see is that technology really tends to be the tip of the iceberg. And we really take a step back and go help companies define their strategy from a three-pronged approach. So it's not just technology. We also really have to look at people and process. So people, who do you have on your team today and what are their skills? Also, what is their bandwidth to do new types of initiatives and projects versus, what is keeping them busy from a day-to-day perspective? What kind of tools would, play to their strengths? And, how can we maybe gap fill some of those skills that they don't have with maybe outside resources or developing training plans to be able to upskill all of your employees. From a process perspective, we really focus on understanding your current state first. We want to know, how are your users interacting with your tools and the data you have today? What processes are well defined and what are more ad hoc and variable? Knowing all of these things lend towards our understanding of your business, so we make sure that the technology that you are utilizing is the best for you. And oftentimes, starting with an extension of technologies that you already have can go a really long way before you even need to expand your tech stack. So all of this lends to treating data appropriately. Like the important asset it is. So as people are striving to become data-driven, it may be surprising that only 50% of Fortune 1000 leaders today treat their data as an asset. I don't think this is necessarily deliberate. I think more of it is just kind of status quo. And as data has become more and more important and you've got more and more data to manage, the processes to manage it and protect it and the demand for the ROI of your data to keep up with what you are requiring just hasn't kept up. The other piece is why it's so important to not just look at all of these initiatives from a technology perspective is that 93% of executives identify people and process issues as bigger obstacles to achieving AI and advanced analytics success. So once again, alignment and bringing the right people to the table and having proper communication lines open across various teams within your organization are really critical. And so much of the strategy work up front seems like wasted effort to so many organizations, and it seems like we're not able to show value yet. But if you kind of leapfrog it and don't lay the groundwork and do some of this dirty work up front, it tends to impact your success long term. And it's really one of those main reasons we've seen, in our opinion, so few companies able to see the value from their cloud and analytics initiatives. So it's never, oh, there we go. Off to you, Bruce, sorry.
That's okay. So from a cloud perspective, there has been a lot of growth in the cloud world, and many people that started thinking it was just a trend has now adopted it and is leveraging the capabilities that are available in the cloud. For example, 90% of the data analytics innovation is really going to be driven by the public cloud capabilities that are available and some of the tools that you can leverage in a very timely fashion. That's really going to be a strong driving factor in some of the success and why we think the value of cloud and analytics from bringing them together is really important, because it enables you to take advantage of those cloud capabilities and that instant tooling that you may not be able to do in a traditional environment. In the last 2 years, there has been a 41% reduction in on-premise workloads. So a lot of companies are starting to see how can they take their workloads to the cloud, but they're hopefully and ideally doing it in a strategic way. And that's what we really recommend our customers to do is let's look at the cloud as a strategic approach versus just a tool to implement your technology. Because cloud is not necessarily the right solution for everything. It's the right solution when the tool fits. So you really want to understand what your justification and reason to use cloud is, and then put the tool next to the solution. Today, looking at the Flexera Cloud report that comes out every year, 97% of businesses in that report said that they're using public cloud today in some capacity, as well as 80% are using private cloud in some capacity. So that really kind of shows the strength of having cloud and what a lot of customers are already doing today. And what cloud means to every customer is going to be different, and how much they're in the cloud is going to vary very greatly. When you start to look the blend of these two together, you start to see that 78% are using both private and public cloud. So that doesn't mean that you have to make an all private cloud strategy or an all private. You can create a blend and use the tools that make the most sense to meet those business objectives. And some places are only using a public cloud, and they may be more of a startup industry, and they're in the 19% category where public cloud makes a sense for all of their services, and they really don't see any need for any other technology. So when you look at alignment and you start to think of the resources required to make these initiatives successful, there's a lot of roles needed. You need cloud engineer, data engineer, you need support from leadership, you need analysts, you need people with business and domain expert. So it's really hard and almost impossible to find one person. They really become that unicorn that you really can't find to make that all happen at once. So really it becomes a team effort of multiple people within the organization to make this a success and make sure that the alignment is done right.
So it's really never too early to get started in moving up this maturity curve. But we also know that everyone is at different places. So we wanted to show, regardless of where you are today, how you can start and still see value, and what you can do ultimately to start showing value to your organization. So let's look at maybe you haven't started down this path when it comes to moving any of your workloads to the cloud. That's okay. There's so many pieces from an analytics perspective that are totally possible to get started on, even if everything you have is still on-prem. So really the important part is that you're still working on those alignment issues so that way you can do these pieces well. So let's see what we have. We have enterprise reporting, data governance, translating some of those data processes to business owners. This is also a great time to start doing proof of concepts around some more advanced projects, such as machine learning, that can show value. Doing some of those POCs are possible even if you don't have a fully fledged stood up infrastructure in the cloud. And those small POCs can show quick wins and can show value of those types of initiatives. And because you are able to show some of that value up front, that can help you raise support and get leadership buy-in and funding more end-to-end solutions down the road, and can really help you be able to show what you'd be able to do if you were able to maybe move some of those workloads to the cloud. But with some increased infrastructure capabilities that cloud can provide, it can make some of these more advanced predictive capabilities easier to achieve. And the time to value to seeing the value can greatly decrease. So when we look at real-time analytics with now leveraging the scalability of cloud, you can make sure that the volume of data that's coming in doesn't hinder the speed at which you can get insights. From a machine learning perspective, machine learning can take large volumes of data to train your model. But if you're familiar with the machine learning project lifecycle, training machine learning models is a very, very small sliver of that overall machine learning project lifecycle. So doing this in the cloud allows you to scale up when you need it. So spin up really large clusters, larger than you'd ever need for day-to-day operations, and train your models, and then scale back down once you're done. And so you're only paying for those large compute resources when you need them. From an IoT and sensor data perspective, so much data can be generated from these IoT and sensor data sources. And so that great amount of data volume can make cloud really advantageous. There's so many cold storage options in the cloud that can make storing data at that type of scale more cost effective, and not having to continually commission new hardware all the time will be able to save you a lot of time. So when you're able to look at what you're able to do, we hope you see, regardless of where you are today with either your infrastructure or your analytics capabilities, there's options for what you can start doing today. So where do you think your organization falls? Let's see. There are a lot of different, there are a lot of different initiatives that you may have on your roadmap. So maybe today you feel like your reporting is really siloed. Maybe you're really interested in standing up a more self-service or dashboard-centric reporting tool. Maybe you haven't moved to the cloud, but you're interested in getting started and piloting some of those tools and figuring out what makes sense for you. And like we said before, whether or not you have that full-fledged architecture or not, there's always places to get started. And ultimately, if you want to continue down this path, we can help you get there step by step. So when we are meeting with companies, so many times we want to first review their initiatives. So we wanted to show you some of the initiatives we see a lot today. And then we're going to try to slightly reframe them for what we would say is more aligned initiatives. So to start, One initiative we hear companies having a lot is, they're interested in moving to the cloud, and so they decide that any new initiatives going forward are going to be hosted in the cloud. When companies are wanting to increase their analytics maturity, we oftentimes hear them say that they want to hire a data scientist. Or if they haven't really gotten started and they're interested in getting started and they're getting overwhelmed, we oftentimes have introductory conversations and education sessions around just getting started to do analytics or machine learning. Or sometimes we hear that they're struggling with a bottleneck when it comes to creating the reports that the business wants, and it's they're wanting to gain efficiencies so their IT team can decrease the turnaround time on creating those reports that the business is requesting. So how can we reframe these initiatives to be a little more aligned? Well, before you start standing up brand new data initiatives in the cloud, have you developed a cloud strategy? This strategy can make sure that what is stood up in the cloud is done cohesively instead of ending up with a bunch of one-off projects. And as more and more data processes and data initiatives get moved to the cloud, you can make sure that you have the right foundation, you have standardized naming conventions, and you've defined repeatable processes. So that way, each subsequent project is done even faster. So when we look at hiring a data scientist can oftentimes today be seen similarly to that unicorn reference that Bruce made earlier. So you really shouldn't expect one person or one type of skill set to come in and be able to solve all of your data problems. So we've seen a lot of success with one approach, which is considering an analytics center of excellence. This is a centralized team with contributing members from all across your organization, and everyone gets to provide input, but it's still one centralized team, so it allows for more standardization. Next, wanting to start down the path of doing analytics and machine learning, the best place to start is to define use cases. So this can be a great exercise for any organization to do, regardless of where you are on those maturity curves. When you're defining an analytics use case, some of the things you might want to consider is what is the business value to your organization? And if you can tie those business value metrics to dollars and hours saved, that can be really helpful in being able to kind of get the buy-in that you need to be able to do something new. Oftentimes, if you've never done machine learning or you've never done an advanced analytics project, it can be a hurdle to get people to sign off and get excited about it. So if you're able to, forecast the dollars saved, if you're able to be successful, that can be really helpful. And then you can also consider what data would be needed to make it achievable. And so considering both of those, the value that it could provide and the data that you need, that can really help prioritize which one could be the best one to start with. And lastly, if you're struggling with a bottleneck when it comes to creating reports, maybe a foundational shift in who owns these types of report creation tasks could be helpful. So with proper involvement from both IT and the business, self-service reporting platforms can allow for business users to take on more and more of that responsibility. And that could break down the IT bottleneck and allow the business to get the reports that they see as most beneficial, as they know those metrics and what they're trying to report off of better than anyone. So this is, one of the approaches we take when we're with different organizations. And so we're happy to, meet with you and review your own initiatives. This presentation that we just gave is a small part of a 90-minute workshop that we bring to companies to help them work through how to converge their own cloud and analytics initiatives. So if you are interested in hosting a workshop, it's completely free. Reach out to Bruce or myself and we can give you more information on the type of additional interactive exercises we do in addition to some of this education training. So with that, I think we are ready to open it up to some questions. Not sure, Mike, if we've had any come in or can
Yes,
read them
first, thank you, Madison and Bruce, for a great presentation and lots of exciting information on cloud and analytics and where things are going right now. I'll kick it off with the first question we got is, do you find some industries benefit from this approach more than others? Specifically, manufacturing running analytics on IoT streams versus financial services fraud detection efforts?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. From an industry perspective, I wouldn't say that the industry is necessarily what we would consider as whether or not they're going to be more successful with this approach or not. It really comes down to that use case and the data that's feeding that use case. So I think both of those examples that you just gave were kind of real-time analytics, high data volume. So they would be what we would consider those more mature analytics capabilities that would benefit from leveraging some cloud resources. But I wouldn't say that either of those examples would be, better because of their industry. It's not because it's a manufacturing use case or a financial services use case. It's more just based on the real-time nature and the data volume that you mentioned.
Next question here, can you help explain some of the key factors when you're dealing with analytics and cloud in choosing a private versus public cloud strategy?
I think when you're looking at your strategy and what you really are picking in your platform, it really comes down to the use case and what types of tools are going to help you support that use case. Because there are tools available to on-premise and they are definitely capable. And we've done implementations for on-premise customers that had workload demands that we wanted to do on-premise. But really what drives that selection criteria is how much, like Madison's mentioned a couple of times, what's the data volume and how does that match up with the use case? And how quickly are you able to scale your on-premise workloads to meet those demands? And a lot of our customers don't have the capability to turn storage and compute resources on in an instant's notice, whereas cloud provides that capability. And so it gives that flexibility that customers may not have on-premise. So that's really what we look at, the value proposition, and why we would probably try to talk customers into looking at cloud capabilities, but not all customers go that route. So there's definitely on-premise capabilities. There's just a difference in the scale factor.
So what is your preferred analytics platform? This question says they've been having a hard time justifying the jump to Power BI or a similar reporting service from a price perspective. What are your comments on that?
No, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't say that we have like one analytics platform that's right for everybody. From a partnership perspective, we're both a Microsoft partner as well as an AWS partner. So when we come in, oftentimes, we partnered with those types of platforms because we see the value that it can bring to a lot of different organizations. But I guess when we talk about a price perspective, we'd really have to get in and understand the amount of users you have, the amount of data you're storing, and there can be different options that are more cost effective, I guess, if we were able to know those specifics. If you are specifically considering Power BI, one of the cool functionalities that they just most recently came out with was a Power BI premium per user subscription model, which drastically decreases the price for being able to enter into their more premium services like automated machine learning. So previously that was only like an enterprise-wide subscription, and they now have brought that down to allow for organizations that may not have the breadth of users to be able to pay for a per user license, even with those premium those premium options. So those are some of the things that we could work through and understand. You know, what are you paying today? What's your price threshold, and what is out there that is able to fit within those constraints.
And depending on what you're really trying to do from a use case perspective, you want to try to build a return on investment. So you want to show the investment you're going to put into the analytics platform is going to be less than the value you're going to get out of it. So you really want to justify the first business use case when you implement those tools needs to show true value to the business, either in a revenue model perspective, growth model, whatever that value is. That's really where you start to see the benefit and less concerned about the dollars that go into the solution.
Excellent. In your maturity levels chart, you do a great job showing the gap between the early maturity stuff and the late maturity stuff. What are some of the indicators that you're ready to take that leap from the basic fundamental on-site analytics to the more advanced cloud predictive analytics?
Yeah, I'd say I don't want to start sounding like a broken record, but the biggest thing are those use cases. So if you're able to say that we see the value in being able to do X, Y, or Z, and X, Y, or Z is one of those more predictive and advanced capabilities, that's where it's worth trying to understand, okay, what do we need to get there? What are the proper steps? What is that roadmap? But if you start with, we want to do advanced things just to do advanced analytics, it's going to be a really big hurdle. So regardless of where you are today, kind of that dreaming session of understanding, okay, what could we do? And is it worth doing, and really associating what you want to do to those dollar figures is the biggest thing. And then that gets your organization really excited too. If you're able to say, we see the potential in doing this use case, that really like permeates throughout the organization, and it's easier to get buy-in, it's easier to get people interested in learning new technologies and learning new skills. So it really all does, in my opinion, stem from that understanding of your use cases and what is capable with the data that you have.
So we've talked a few times about use cases. Without sharing any confidential information, any favorite use cases you two have that are just really neat examples of where you can go with some of the stuff?
That's a good question. I would say most recently we had a very good engagement with a trucking company that we worked really well to understand their business model and what use cases they had. And the use case they looked at was a way to improve their freight exchange process. And so we really worked with them to understand what that looked like in the end, and then how we're going to build out an environment to support that use case. And ultimately, we were able to put together a fully automated implementation for them, and they were able to leverage the capabilities within a short time frame. And so we really was excited just because of the energy that was around that use case, and working with that customer was very, very fun.
Yeah, I can think of one that was really like more of like a data science and analytics project that we've done recently. Was with a large hospital system, and we were able to uncover essentially $370,000 in additional revenue for their hospital, just based on how they were billing certain emergent visits in their emergency room. So we were able to look at, okay, here are all these visits of specifically within a certain insurance payer method, and if they were able to bill the visit appropriately with just a few different tweaks, they were essentially shortchanging themselves, like I said, over $370,000 over the course of a given year. And it wasn't anything that I think what was cool about that is it wasn't anything that the biller was doing on purpose, or anything that, if they would have known they could have done this, they would have just done it. But just the volume of visits that they had over the course of the year, they didn't have a way to parse through all of that information. And so, leveraging some more advanced analytics and data science pieces, we were able to uncover, an issue that they didn't even see, just from like a day-to-day reporting perspective.
Great examples. Thank you. Last question I have before we turn it back to you to wrap it up is, what are some of the risks companies should think about as they start to move into more and more advanced analytics?
I'd say the risks factor is just comes down to the amount of data that you're trying to parse through based on the use case. A lot of times that can overwhelm your IT organization when you're trying to build a large environment and a fast time frame to get business value. And so that's really one of the things I would think of more from the infrastructure and cloud perspective is, how is IT going to be able to support those needs and support the business in that use case and make sure they're successful? And I mean, I've been in the IT world a long time and on the customer side as well. And when IT is kind of surprised by initiatives like this, they're typically harder to work with than if they were engaged in the very beginning, like Madison mentioned earlier in our presentation.
Yeah, and then I guess just the one other thing I'd add is kind of what the foundation of this talk was on, right? Is alignment and like those communication pieces, making sure you have leadership involved, making sure you have people from the business who are really advising on what they need to see and what they want to see from an analytics perspective, but not leaving IT out in the cold so they feel like they're able to support what you're trying to do from all of those pieces that Bruce just mentioned.
Okay, that looks like that's the end of the questions. Bruce and Madison, any last comments that either one of you want to make as we wrap up?
I think we covered the alignment pretty well, but in my mind, it's really important to focus on how you're going to build those use cases and what the value to the business is going to be. Because we've seen failures that are typically stemmed from poorly defined use cases or poor support from the leadership team or poor support from IT. So getting aligned with all of those resources and all of the key stakeholders in that decision-making process as early as possible is the important piece to make sure it's successful, and making sure that it doesn't end up being another project that didn't quite go as planned.
Yeah. I'd say the other piece too is, if you are able to, do that upfront work and lay out a strategy, it's really important that once you have that strategy defined, that you don't then, when you go to do the execution, you're not picking and choosing pieces of your strategy out. A lot of the times, a strategy can look really good on paper, and then when you go to execute it, it's easy to kind of say, oh, well, do we actually have to do that piece? Or like, oh, is it, we could do this faster if we skip this part. Or I thought for sure when we said we should do that, there would be a quicker or a more efficient way to do that. And ultimately what we've found is a lot of the hard stuff is hard, and putting the time up front to define the strategy, but then seeing that throughout the execution piece is really, really important.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you both for your time and expertise. And we are out of time for this session, so we will send you back to the main sessions. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.